I'm going to show you a short part of a DVD, and this is just while other people come back together. But it's, if anyone knows Gruen Transfer, it's actually a segment off just a couple of weeks ago, Gruen Transfer. It's an ad which is about the impact which alcohol drinking has on young kids and fathers. Role within that, I suppose, is what this ad is talking to. This next section of this afternoon, we're really looking at, well, what does it mean to apply this generative perspective? And I'm wanting to just wave the flag that there are many ideas in public domain, you could say, which already use these sort of notions without necessarily calling it that generative word. But anything which talks about that it has a multi-generational focus of what did you learn from that, either when you were growing up, what does that mean for you now, where does this actually, how does this influence other people key in your life in the future, you are getting a very generational perspective of learning in life, and you're also getting a generative connection happening. And it's about how do you make the most of these generative connections. As we've seen this morning, this body of knowledge sits very strongly within positive psychology. It's within a psychodynamic context. It has been forged and articulated since the 1940s. It comes out of a whole tradition where it's not as much understanding all of the little entities of what has an impact on our life, but the overall effect that it has. It either helps us or it works against what is it we want. And so it's the overall impact and influence which a lot of these exercises are trying to utilise. It very much sits well with a solution-focused approach, which is currently used and is seen as very good practice in working with men.
To do just that.
I heard you blokes finish up the other night. Right. It's huge. Michael, go and get your old man a beer, would you?
Michael, are those snacks ready yet?
In a minute, love. How'd you blokes finish up after the other night, eh? Right. Joe, go get your old man another beer, would you?
Kids form the attitude to alcohol long before they ever have a drink themselves, from their most important role model. You.
It's the first time I've seen why it might be handy to have a kid. Have a couple so they can go and get me some chips. In the US, tobacco companies have been criticised for making supposedly anti-smoking ads that show people smoking and looking cool. Matt, when I look at that DrinkWise ad, what I see is people drinking and having a good time.
Look, I think it's a bit esoteric, to be honest. And the thing that I find really weird about this whole DrinkWise idea is that advertising is done by the very same agency that does the Carlton Draft and Pure Blonde advertising.
Is that true?
Yeah. And I find that, and I wonder if that is the reason why it's so soft. You know, like,
I completely... This, to me, is the best of the lot.
Really?
This is the best of the lot by a long way.
I'm going to get under the table.
Oh, it's on.
And I tell you what, I believe it is the best of the lot because it's taking into account that it's about a culture of drinking. Yeah, and it's about saying, you know what, this is a long-term thing that we're dealing with here. And we like to drink. Australians like to drink. We did it day one. First fleet arrived and everyone got pissed. Yeah, we love drinking. So this isn't saying don't drink, but it is saying this is our culture, and perhaps there is some things that we can do in order to shape it a little bit better. I genuinely believe this is the best of the lot. The other interesting thing about this is there really a problem? But we've all assumed that there is an issue.
Yeah.
The whole show's assumed that there's an issue.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should have set that up first.
With teen drinking? Have you not read a newspaper?
I don't feel like it. I think the strategy is interesting. I don't feel like it achieves the goal because I don't think it's too slick.
What?
I feel like I'm.
I hate to say it. I agree a bit with Russell on this one.
Only a bit.
I do, but look, it's not my favourite ad. But I look at it and I think that the stat 70% of kids under 12 have tried alcohol, and a lot of it's with parents. So I think addressing the parents is a really critical part of the strategy.
But that would also be the case in Italy.
Yeah, but hold on, Russell. I haven't even finished speaking yet. I could be going that way. I could be going that way. You're disagreeing with me before I even say anything.
As
But what I think does work about it was when it ran, it was outrage. Because people said, how dare you say that I'm teaching my kids that habit? There's nothing wrong with getting your kid to do that. It reflected real life to them. And I think that made people go, because people that look at it, if you look at it and think all I see is people having a good time, well then you're not the target market.
And look, the other thing about it is the language is right. Yeah, it's adult to adult language. It's just drink-wise. Yeah, so there's nothing preachy about it. It's not parent to child. It's very, very clever and extremely well thought out. And I don't think it's surprising that it's done by the alcohol industry and people that know how to do those sorts of ads.
Well, let me ask.
So the actual discussion around the topic of that ad could go on all afternoon in itself. But what that ad puts to you and the discussion of it is that the generative approach is a powerful approach. You know, it is one which some people may think it doesn't actually really name those critical call issues, but in some ways you hear it from that Russell's point of view. So these are advertising geeks who just know and speak about that art day in, day out, that it's very important to be able to talk adult to adult. And that's what the generative language is, because it's about lifelong learning. What is it that's important influences? What are those impacts? If you're thinking about putting this into practice, some of those things that it's really important to talk about with men is that you've got to have a discussion. And you know that it's actually hard sometimes for guys to have these discussions, but it's actually a liberating discussion, is the generative discussion, because it picks up on those critical motivations that are the unspoken messages in so many men's lives. Again, it is relevant for women too, but women have a much wider dialogue and an everydayness of experience of talking through these discussions. So even though the generative experience is just as profound, it's not as much of a knife edge as it is for working with men, where it is really one of the strongest and best tools which we have to be able to focus that discussion. In a sense, like this picture of the temple in Greece, it is something that's going to outlive you. It's bigger than you. It's something that actually is that you are willing to invest your time and energy in, is really some of those ideas which is around generative approach. You're often working with the idea of tensions with generativity, that it's that idea of something that you actually sacrifice to actually achieve something, as well as practical solutions. And in that context of separation, there are many men who actually choose purposefully to leave the family home because they believe it's actually going to be safer, wiser, more practical, more important for the family safety and the kids' well-being overall if they take that step out. And that actually, in a sense, that's an unspoken sacrifice, but it's an important one which can be named and can be valued. Some of those other things which we heard about in this focus on generativity is that it's all about that sense of yourself and who you are and what does it mean for you to live life in the world today. In a sense, some of those key ideas which we heard about are motivations are a very important part of that, the unspoken motivations we're trying to articulate. What are some of those beliefs which actually surround all of that is you're trying to generate discussions about as well? And again, some of those beliefs may be skewed and may be fragile, and some may be even inappropriate, but you're trying to talk to that place in a very honest and direct way. Because what it also is done is trying to find the meaning of what is it that, is behind their actions, and what does that meaning have for them, and how that meaning will be seen by others is a very powerful part of what you're actually trying to talk to. And then finally, it informs your action. And we know that for a lot of men, that's the language of change, is what can they do as a result of whatever the situation that they face. Some of you will know the Circle of Security program. In a sense, it's also another way of, it's actually about that sign of safety. It highlights very much what this generative approach is all about. If you can actually see within this slide, there is a father sitting, watching how his child deals with this little toddler deals with the perceived challenge of a narrow box, a bit of a dark tunnel, obstacles to be dealt with, and in a sense the father is actually standing that bit removed in that idea of trying to actually encourage, his child to be able to respond and face and to be able to deal with this challenge in a secure and strong way. You can see the celebration within the father as the child goes through it and the actual joy on that child's face, and then how the father actually moves closer to be part of that celebration. It's that everyday story of parenting, but that's what the generative approach is all about. Remembering that the generative approach has an immediate parenting capacity, but it also has a broader influence on the wider society and community capacity, is what you're trying to talk about. Some of those ideas really embedded in this approach is very much about that generativity is work. And that's a really important language to talk about with men, because that is a major feature which has shaped men's lives, is the idea that it is about work. The being in the world is about work. It's something that's active. It's something which is often practical. It's often something that's going to achieve or outlive you, is that working environment which men and women operate in every day. Some of those other ways which in generative work we see that it's defined by is that it has a developmental capacity, that a father can understand and respond appropriately to the developmental needs of his child. Again, that development may be knowing that there's times where the father's going to be close, but there's also times that the father's going to be far away and removed. But it's also that the father is there to make sure that that child learns the message in life that they can survive and will survive, that they will be a survivor and not a victim to life circumstances, is the message you're trying to talk towards. It is also relational work. So it's understanding the relational needs of what children need. Again, it's going to have a variety of ways which that's shown in men's actions, but you're interested and curious to how they understand the relational needs which their child has. It's actually also ethical. In good strengths-based practice, in good... in many of the approaches which we use today in community services, it is all about actually values driven, and it's highly ethical set of values is really what we are which we are celebrating and using. And also it's about stewardship work, where the father can actually provide the resources needed for their child over the fullness of that child's life to be able to make the most of the child's circumstances. In fact, generativity is all about the relationship. It's about using their perception of the relationship. When you work with men in that early stages of engagement, our relationship with them is extremely weak. In fact, it's actually seen as even in a much more highly negative way, because we are seen as interferers, busybodies, and there to preach or lecture them and give them a hard time. Whereas the relationship to those key relationships in their life are the critical ones which you're wanting to focus on. And some of those relationships will be perceived in a strong way. It could have a neutral expression, or it could have a weak or a detrimental expression. But you're trying to find where that actually exists, where the strength in that relationship is found in the men's lives that you work with.